An update here on the Momotion Luba. Right now it is late May of 2024. I've had this running for about a month, give or take a bit, and I've tried to experiment with a few different locations for the charge station and for the RTK antenna for my particular property. If you've seen any of the other Automower videos that I have on like the Husqvarna 435X or the 315X that's over there, you probably have a pretty good sense of what my property is like. This section over here around the back, that has a fair amount of tree cover and shade, and it's very hilly and pretty rough stuff. Right now I have the 435X dedicated to that. That runs on a boundary wire that took quite some time to set up for that property. I did try initially to get the Luba set up for parts of that property, but the key problem there is that there is tree cover, and so it pretty regularly gets lost in this area because of a lack of good positioning information. The Luba and the RTK antenna both have to talk to enough of the same amount of satellites to have good positioning, and it seems like if they're both talking to around 20 satellites, common satellites, then it has good positioning and it can keep going. But once that number drops too low, it'll just pause where it is and say, poor positioning status, and it'll just wait until it gets a signal, or maybe it's in a spot where it never gets a signal and it just sits there forever, and you have to go retrieve it, put it out somewhere where you have better sky coverage and let it keep going. So for the time being, I have the Luba set up to do areas where I have pretty good access to the sky, which is basically this back driveway here. This whole thing is gravel, but as you can see, we get a lot of weed coverage here. So I'm using this to basically just keep the weed height low. And then there's also a section in this elevated yard around the side of that yard, or along the street. There's about a 6 or 7 foot wide patch of grass running along this way, and then across the driveway on another part of the front there. I'll show you that in a minute. So those have good access to the sky, and you can see based on where the charge station is, this has pretty good access to the sky. But the RTK antenna is not there. I had tried putting it in the roof initially. That didn't work so great, at least for my particular house. I don't have an insulated roof. The roof's going to get very hot in the summer. But even before it got hot, I wasn't getting enough common satellite coverage between where the antenna was and where the Luba was. Now, to be fair, that charge station was over here under these grapevines, so maybe that was the fundamental problem. Even still, though, because I don't have an insulated attic, maybe not the best idea to mount the RTK antenna there. I did try some other rooms on this side of the house because I want to do sort of this side of the property here. Didn't have a whole lot of luck. I tried also on the other side of the house where I have a balcony, and that didn't work out so great either, even though I have a lot better sky coverage on that side of the house. So ultimately what I decided to do, if we just walk around here, is there's a garden on this side of the house here, and you can see the Luba, the RTK antenna right there. And from there I get pretty good sky coverage. It gets a good field of view to this side over here where the back driveway is, and a reasonable field of view to these two front strips of grass on the front side of the house. Not that it needs a direct view, but I have found so far that if the antenna is on the same side of the property as what you're mowing, you tend to get better results than if the antenna is on the other side of the property and your mower is on the other side of the house. So this strip here it'll do, and I set up a path to go across the front driveway and do that strip down there. Some of the issues I ran into is basically related to things around the edge. So for example, this section here, this part used to be grass, but the garbage truck comes up a lot and rides along this curb, and it basically destroys this part of the lawn. So there's a bit of a divot here from where you see the grass to where you see the dirt or the gravel. And if I set the Luba up to go right up to that edge, it's going to go over the edge as it tries to cover the edge, and then it'll get stuck there. So I have to set up the boundary to be a little bit behind that so it doesn't get stuck. And then going around this section here, you got to keep it a little bit away from the bushes here so it doesn't get stuck under all of this stuff. So I have to pull it back a bit. And then down there by the corner, that gets really loose. So again, I have to pull that back so the Luba doesn't get stuck there trying to turn around. But so I'd say I can cover maybe like 90% of this with the Luba, and I still have to go in and trim the edges manually. The other thing I've noticed is when it cuts this section here, it doesn't actually cover everything. It'll actually leave a little bit of a strip of grass right about here. And then another strip of grass right about there that's not cut. I've tried zigzag and checkerboard patterns with this, and for some reason it doesn't seem to cover all of the area that I outlined in the perimeter. So that's a little strange. Not too big a deal for me because this isn't a huge section of grass here. I could just hit it with my trimmer. I don't really have the same problem over there. It tends to do that job much better, but still you got to be a little careful with how you set the boundaries. It doesn't always cover all of it. So that's number one. Other things that I've noticed with this, in let's say comparing it to the Husqvarna 435X in terms of what's good and what's bad, I'll do more of the bad stuff first. This, to turn around, it does tank turns, which can be useful because that means it does a 0-degree radius turn. But what ends up happening is, for instance, when it's doing this part of the property here, it'll come around and then it'll turn here to go this way. And as it's doing that, it digs up the gravel as it's turning. Now this is just gravel. I can sweep it all back, no big deal. But if you're on grass, it's going to do the exact same thing. And I have tried to use that on sections of this property back here to make it a little easier for the 435X. And on certain sloped sections, where it was trying to turn around and it was getting not really stuck, but having to take several attempts to make the turn, you notice it was digging up the grass. So between the two of them, ironically, the 435X is probably better at not abusing the grass on sloped sections that are kind of slippery. The 435X will still beat up those sections of lawn. It'll just take it longer to do so. The motion, because it does those tank turns, even with the updated front wheels that are supposed to roll as you're turning, it still doesn't do a great job because the rear wheels are still these treaded wheels, and as those are turning, it kind of rips into the grass a bit. I did try to set it up to do some trimming on this side because no auto mower is perfect. What I have for the boundary wire for the Husqvarna mower, I have boundary wire set up all along this, and it doesn't cut all the way up to or past the boundary. You still have to run your manual trimmer to trim the edges. So I figured, okay, let me try setting up the Luba to sort of work around this part of the property and trim along the retaining wall there, and maybe do a little bit over there, and maybe do a little bit here. And what ended up happening is, because I have these sections along the edge here where there's these stones that define the edge of this sort of gravel bed here, if I set up the edge right along the edge of those stones, which is what I would want to really trim everything, the Luba kind of goes back and forth around the edge. And so it's going to try to ride over these stones and then back, and it'll oftentimes get stuck. So you do have to pull it away from that so it doesn't get stuck, but then you're not trimming everything. So if you want to do just a perimeter run on certain parts of your property, if you have edges like this that are kind of not smooth and very step-like, because these stones have height to them, wouldn't really work great for that. You still have to pull the perimeter boundary away a bit from these sort of regions here. So that was one issue. The other issue was this section over here, where for the 435X I tend to keep it out of this area, or at least I don't have it mowed all the time, because there are certain parts where it gets stuck a lot, like down there. It tends to get stuck a lot, and I just want to avoid the hassle. So I let this grow out a bit, and then I'll cut it, fewer times throughout the season. I tried to set up the Luba to cut in this area, and bear in mind, see, I'm on the other side of the property. The RTK antenna is right over there. It has a direct line of sight to the mower throughout pretty much all of this. Even still, I had issues with positioning just in setting up the perimeter here, because there's all this tree coverage. And even if the RTK antenna can see your mower, if you don't have good sky coverage, you're still going to have poor positioning with it. So you really need good sky coverage. One thing that, I really can't say whether the Luba 2 is any better. That's their newer mower that has a camera on it that's supposed to account for some of these problems. Maybe in the future I might try that. I might sell this to someone else that has a more appropriate yard for it, and then get a Luba 2 and try it out here. But if you want to do things like this, especially with its tree coverage and with its weird looking edges, the Luba is not great for that. Neither is the Husqvarna, by the way. You just have to manually trim it with your own trimmer. It doesn't take that long, but it would be nice to save just that little bit of extra effort with lawn care. What other things can I say about it? One thing I do like about it is that it is kind of on the aggressive side, so that when the blades start spinning, they do spin faster, and generally it'll cut more grass on a single pass or weeds as a result of that, so that's good. But it's not always great with object detection. So for example, one time I had the battery that I use for this 315X over here, I had it sitting on this retaining wall, and I had 2 solar panels sitting on here charging the battery. So I get pretty good sunlight here to charge the battery throughout the day. I tried to put in a no-go zone in this area, but I didn't really put like a perimeter in there. I just tried to do from this wall out and then back like this to make sort of a U shape, and that wasn't quite enough to stop the Luba from pushing through that sort of boundary into the area where the solar panels were, and I rode over it, and I rode over the wires that were connected the panels to the battery, and it chopped up a bunch of stuff, and it cut some of the wires, and I had to go in, and basically repair all of that with wire clippers and a soldering iron, and it was not fun. So if you're going to set a keep out zone with this, make sure it's an actual perimeter. If you're going to do a U shape like this next to a wall, it may find the gap that's right next to the wall where that U shape ends and go through there, or maybe just that shape specifically isn't wide enough and it won't really recognize it as an actual keep out zone, and it'll just cut straight through it. So watch out for that. Other than that, I'd say it's pretty good. Again, I'm not really taxing this too heavily. I'm using it for parts of my property that it's really appropriate for. The back driveway and those 2 strips I showed you in the front, that's where I have the most access to the sky. That's where I need to use it the most also, because I have auto mowers for everything else already, pretty much everything else. So far so good. It would be nice to have a single auto mower that can cover everything, rather than having, one for this elevated yard there, and one over there, and then another one over here. Maybe in the future there will be one that can work very well with accurate positioning like the Luba has, but also not have the tank turn problem with beating up the grass. It can also do good trimming. It can also work under the shade and everything else. So far they're not quite there yet, but this is okay. And by the way, the amount of money I spent on this is actually less than what I originally spent on the Husqvarna 315X when I first bought that about 6 or 7 years ago. So in terms of the capabilities of auto mowers over time, just in the past couple of years there have been massive strides in what auto mowers can do. Not just cutting grass, but the features that the apps come with, the way you can position them, the way you set up keep out zones, the way you schedule them, everything. They can do a lot more now than they used to be able to, and at a lower price per capability set. So I think that's a good thing. And yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at there for now. Thanks for watching.